for example, are real estate professionals. We know the market better than anybody else. We see the trends. We know the stats. We take people through open houses. We know that information. So they're really going to be relying on us to be the experts.
Hello, and welcome to your Waking Up to Win podcast with Realty ONE Group. Our objective, as you now know, is to be your one resource and the voice of both inspiration and reality during these changing times. We're committed to bringing you the best in the industry and to discuss topics that bring you value as we move ahead one day at a time. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Realty ONE Group's Chief Marketing Officer, Cory Vasquez. Hey, Cory, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Mark. Great being here.
Cory has been with Realty ONE Group for over a year now, but you've been in a communications role, either PR, social media, or crisis communications for more than 20 years. So we're excited to have you here to talk about giving media interviews.
Yeah, you wouldn't know I've been in the communication role for 20 years, given that first response, but this is one of my first podcasts. So I'm really excited to be here. And yes, it's been 20 years of a field that started in PR, public relations, and has just evolved over all those years. So, now we handle things like social media, crisis communications, digital marketing. It's just blossomed into a lot of different activities and strategies and tactics.
I really think this is an interesting topic for today. Even though many of us want to avoid the news, we're so dependent on it right now to try to understand what's happening. And you've actually worked in newsrooms, so maybe right now you can tell us what the perspective is inside those rooms.
Yeah, I do. I think it's really interesting. Once you've been in a newsroom, you kind of understand the sense of philosophy and theory behind what's going on. And I know for me, these are the challenging times to watch the news because it feels like it's just all bad, right? I think that to be honest with you, a lot of the outlets have done a good job of bringing some positivity into the situation that we're facing right now. But here's the deal is our journalists have to report the news. And they've kind of taken an oath, if you will, to be objective. And a lot of the information that's coming right now is either heavy or difficult or feels just very negative. So sometimes when I hear people getting upset with the media that it's all very negative, I think that there's just a little perspective I can add there and that they have to report what they've got to report. So, and again, this is broadcast, this is online, it's all of our media today. They're doing their best to get the information to us so that we can process that and then, change the way we do things or work differently or live differently. So they don't want to necessarily create panic or add to the anxiety. But again, we just kind of have to respect that role. They are our source for information. And I think they're doing the best they can. And like I said, there's a lot of outlets that are doing an excellent job of feeding in some of that positivity and some of the fun things and the great things that are happening in the world. So
before we get into what real estate professionals can do right now for news teams, let's talk about why agents are so important to the media and how they can be a resource.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about the media. Like I said, I've been in this business for 20 plus years. I worked in both a broadcast, a print outlet in Northern Colorado. So I wrote for a newspaper, but I also worked at the Denver NBC affiliate for a while. And I think what's been interesting in the 20 plus years I've been in this industry is how significantly those newsrooms have changed. We all know because we consume our news incredibly differently than we ever have, right? A lot of us are either, or most of us are getting our news mobilely, right? So not even from a TV or a broadcast station necessarily, but mobilely. And so we're on the go, we're trying to get news in. Some of it's very quick push information. Some of it's we go out to websites and look for that news. But really what's happened with newsrooms is they've had to adjust to that consumer behavior and how we're trying to get our news these days. So I think one of the interesting things for me is when I was in high school and in college, we had two giant newspapers in Denver metro area. That shrunk to one very quickly right when I got out of college. So we went from having two big news sources to one. And even within that Denver Post, which is our one remaining outlet, that newsroom has shrunken. So they've taken what could have been a staff of 100 with reporters who had individual beats, for example, like one would follow schools and one would follow businesses, that sort of thing, to now very small, agile news teams. And so a lot of what you're seeing is reporters and journalists who are covering several different subjects. So here's what's happening. And this is why agents and our real estate professionals are so important to the media is if you have a reporter who's covering several beats, including school boards, water districts, things like that, and the housing market, they're not going to be incredibly knowledgeable about each one of those beats. So they're really going to need to rely heavily on experts in those industries. So for example, our real estate professionals, we know the market better than anybody else. We see the trends. We know the stats. We take people through open houses. We know that information. So they're really going to be relying on us to be the experts. So let me talk a little bit about how you can be a resource then. Like I said, know your market, have your numbers ready, know what's going on. And that's just good business anyways as a real estate professional, but especially if you're going to build relationships with journalists, they want you knowledgeable. They want you to be the expert. The second part would then be to reach out to them, let them know that you're available. So here's what you have to keep in mind. They are writing stories fiercely and ferociously and all day long because we don't just get our news with a morning paper anymore. It's an all-day process. So they're posting stories midday, evening, etc. They're also responding. They're getting requests. They're checking emails. They're busy just like we are. So if you can reach out to them and say, hey, I'm a local expert in the market. I've done real estate. I've had this many transactions last year. I'm talking to clients. I know what's going on. If you ever need anything, let me know, and sort of establish a relationship with them and let them know that you're available. You're going to increase your chances that they'll call you when they need you or reach out to you when they're ready. The third thing I would say is give them ideas on what's trending. So don't just reach out and say, hey, I'm a real estate professional. If you need me, I'm here. Give them a little bit of an idea of what's going on. This world that we're living in right now is moving so fast, right? That we're seeing different changes day by day. If you can give them an idea of what's going on, what people are talking about, and always think about what their audience would want to know, you're going to have a better chance of establishing a relationship with them. So one thing that I want to impress upon you is you need to think like a consumer of their information. What would you want to know if that reporter was going to write a story about the local market, the local housing market? What would you want to know? Because you are essentially a reader. You're a consumer of their content. So always think like their audience. And then fourth is to call them back. That may seem like the simplest thing, but I've had many, many reporters who said, I reached out to your real estate professional. I never heard back from them. Sometimes if you just the act of calling them back and returning a phone call will make you one of their favorite sources ever.
Those are all great ideas. And I think many of us didn't even know the media might need or even want to talk to us. But here's the thing. I'm wondering how many of our agents feel like they'd be prepared and could give an on-camera interview. And I know that's what you want to walk us through here today, but let's go over what kind of interviews they might be expected to do.
Yeah, so thanks, Mark. Lots of different interviews that you may entertain. So some of them are written interviews, meaning you'll have a journalist who will reach out and say, hey, I have 3 questions for you. Can you email me back a response? Because really probably what they're looking for is they're going to write the story. They've got the stats and the numbers. They've got the meat to kind of fill the story, but they might just want some interesting quotes from you or some additional perspective from you. So sometimes you'll get, and this, if I had to say, I'd say this is probably the bulk of what you'll get is emailed questions and can you reply? When you're replying for those written interviews, remember that you want to kind of talk as a soundbite. And what I mean by that is you're providing them probably a quote. So, you want to say some interesting things, maybe give them some numbers, make sure you know the stats and know they're accurate, but give them some interesting things that you would want to hear in a quote or in a soundbite. So you're still thinking like you're being interviewed on TV, but you're actually writing a response, because the better you write that and the more colorful those answers, the more likely they'll put your quotes in, which you want to have happen. Then you'll do some phone interviews. So same thing where they'll give you a quick call and say, I have a couple questions. If you've got time, can I ask you it? Feel free. You're going to talk through them. Just remember again that they're looking for those sound bites. So they're probably either recording the call or they're writing as quickly as they can. And they're looking for some really great, colorful quotes that they can add. Then the third type of interview you'll do, it would be a broadcast. So either on camera, radio nowadays, like that's even live, Facebook lives, or sometimes we're seeing, videos that go out on social media. So when I say broadcast, we're talking anything on camera or radio or even something like this, a podcast. And so let me give you a couple of quick tips for each of those. Written interviews, again, very colorful. Think about numbers and stats that you can give them, because they're really looking for, again, that nice, succinct information, but in a colorful way. So feel free to express your opinion about it, and those will probably end up in quotes. And same thing again with phone interviews. I think that what you want to do is for written interviews, you're going to ask what the deadline is and take some time to reply. If they need it back immediately, then clearly you're going to need to send it back. But if a lot of times what I want you to do is ask that reporter what their deadline is. So if they need it by end of day, then you've got a little bit of time to go in, check your stats, look at the market, really think about kind of the quotes that you're providing. So both of that for written interviews. phone interviews, if they want to ask you right away, you may be put kind of on the spot. So again, make sure that you know your numbers. Don't put out any numbers that you don't know. But if they want to schedule a phone interview with you for tomorrow or whenever, then that gives you some time to prepare. And then the same for broadcast. And then we've got a lot of tips that I can share with you on broadcast, but we can do that a little bit later.
Wow, excellent tips. Thank you for those. And also, several of us at the Hub recently went through media training, and I have to say it was very insightful and prepared us well.
Yeah. So, I think media training is one of my favorite things to do because I think there's a lot more to it than most people anticipate. Giving those really great interviews, it's actually a skill. It's a strategy. I spent a lot of time in my career training people on the media. And it's kind of interesting because once you train people on the media or you've been media trained, you start to look at the interviews, even on your daily news that are given, and start to kind of analyze what interviews work, what don't, and kind of recognize the tips that we go through in media training. So let me give you some of the basic interview tips. And then as you know, Mark, this can honestly be one long training. You could do I've done this before, an entire day of training and work on each one of these aspects. But we're just going to give you some of the highlights here today. So I'm going to walk through 9 kind of quick basic interview tips. I want you all to remember these will help you no matter what giving an interview. First, like I said, always get back to a reporter. Return the call. I can't impress that upon you enough. If they don't get a call, remember a lot of them are on a quick deadline. If they don't get a call back, they're just going to go on to the next real estate professional. And if I didn't say it before, the reason why you want to be a resource for them is that gets your name out in the media. You get a lot more exposure for that. And remember, that's free, right? You're not paying for advertising, number one. So that's free for you. And number two, when you're included in a media story like that, that's written by a journalist, it gives it a lot more objectivity. So people don't, again, it's just not an ad, right? It's not something spammy. You're not telling people how wonderful you are as a real estate professional. You're getting your name out there in a free way, and a reporter's using you as a knowledgeable, credible source. So that's huge bonus points for you. Number two, be prepared. Always be prepared. So if you know you're getting a call, if you know you're going to be interviewed, make sure you've gone through your notes, make sure you know your stats, etc. Just be as prepared as you possibly can so that you feel comfortable giving that interview. Number three is know your key messages. So when I have people who are preparing for an interview, I always have them write out 2, 3, 4 bullets of their key messages. What are the messages that you want to get out today? And an example of this could be, we're going through a change in our economy, a change in the housing market, but here's what you need to know as a buyer or seller. There are still houses available on the market at good prices. Mortgage rates are lower than ever. That may be your second key messages. This is a great time to take advantage of that. 3, you're not going to get into bidding wars. So if you've been thinking about buying and you've got and you're pre-approved, contact a real estate professional will get you in the market, etc. So know those key messages, have those written out in bullets, and I'm going to tell you why in this next tip. Because 4, you use a technique called bridging to return to your key messages. Now, again, this is a concept that I could spend an entire day talking about or teaching, but bridging is really the art of answering a question in one way. So you always want to try and answer a journalist's questions, but leading that question or that response back to one of your key messages. So for example, if a reporter were to say on a live interview or, on a phone or something like that, say to you, well, I understand from other sources, this is a horrible market. You could respond. You never want to answer negatively if you can help it. You want to respond and say there are certainly some challenges to the market, like there always are. Every housing market has its own challenges, whether for buyers or sellers, etc. But in this instance or in this regard, there's some great opportunities as well. And so you see how you're turning the conversation back, and then you can go back to one of your key messages. So for example, you could say, but the opportunities that exist are that there's great inventory available, low interest rates. This is a really good time to still buy a house. So again, bridging is a strategy. I think one of the fun things I would tell you about bridging techniques, and we'll talk about it just here in a minute too, is watching people use it effectively on interviews, because you can see the good and the bad of it. It's really pretty interesting. Number 5, never lie, guess, or mislead your reporters. So you can always tell the reporter, and don't feel bad about doing this, but you can tell the reporter if they ask you for for a number or a statistic or something that you don't know, you can just tell them that you'll get back to them. Or you can even say, this is better to do this if you don't know. You can even say, I'm not sure. I actually don't know that number, but I do know that 35% of new home buyers are millennials. So I just never ever lie or come up with a number that you're not sure of or say something that might be misleading, because what can happen is, you may end up in that interview and it may be pinpointed or pointed out that that's not the correct statistic, and then that does more damage than it does good. So feel free, again, to tell them that you'll get back to them. You'll get them a right number. And you can always follow up with an email and say, you'd asked me about this number. Here it is. This is the percentage. Just wanted to make sure I followed up with you. They'll appreciate that. As I had said kind of earlier, do not repeat a negative. So if someone were to say to you, and especially this is very, very true for broadcast interviews, if somebody were to say, I hear this is a horrible, horrible market, what can you tell us about that? You don't want to answer the question repeating the negative. So you don't want to say, this is no, this actually isn't a horrible market, because you have to remember you're speaking in sound bites, especially on broadcast. So they may clip some of that quote, and it may look like you're actually saying this is a horrible market. Even if you don't mean that. So you really want to choose your words carefully, knowing that what happens in a broadcast studio is they'll go through and crop some of your answers and your responses and put those together. So instead of saying this is a horrible market, as I kind of mentioned before, there are certainly some challenges in this market that there always are. We always have challenges in any type of housing market. But here's the great part of today's market. And here are the amazing things that are happening. And here are the opportunities. Now, if everything's doom and gloom, you don't want to spin that necessarily too positive. But again, I just encourage you to not repeat those negative words, because they could be taken out of content. Number 7, if on a broadcast, and this is mostly for taped interviews, again, speak in short sound bites. This is one of the things that I had to learn early on in my career, because I was actually given an interview, and I came home, and I'll just give you a funny anecdote, but I came home and I was working for an animal shelter at the time as a director of development, so a fundraiser for them, and they came out and asked us some questions, and I was on a soundbite. I came home and watched the replay of it with my husband on the news, and he was laughing because I was talking the entire time, and at some portion they just cropped a little bit of what I was saying, but then the reporter kept talking over me the entire time. So I just kept talking and talking. My husband finally looked at me and he's like, are you ever going to shut up? Because he just kept talking. So I think that I was very nervous and very anxious, and you might get this way where you get nervous and anxious, and so you continue to talk. Remember that all of these broadcast media and radio shows are looking for small segments of news. So they're going to crop your sound bites. They want maybe 4, 5, 7, 10 seconds of a quote from you. So talk in short sound bites. And if it helps you to remember me speaking and talking and never shutting up, then feel free. Short sound bites. Number 8, there's no such thing as off the record. This used to be a fun one for people, because they would be talking to a reporter, they'd finish up the interview, and the reporter would say to them, now really, let me know, what do you really think about the housing market? And they'd say, well, off the record, it's horrible. Everyone's, it's awful. No one should buy a house in this market. And that reporter can actually still, even though you've said off the record, can still use that information. So please know there's never such a thing is off the record. And we kind of know that today now with social media and everything that happens online. There's nothing that's off the record, right? If you think you're posting just to your friends, other people may be able to see that. So there's no such thing as off the record. And then finally, number 9, follow up with additional information if you have it. So if you forgot to say something in an interview, if you know that there's a resource out there or there's some information out there that might help that reporter round out the story, feel free to follow up with that additional information. They may or may not use it, but they're always going to appreciate the effort.
All of that is such great stuff, Cory. I especially like the bridging technique. And having learned that at our media training, I can see it being used all the time now on interviews and in political debates. It's really an impressive skill. And I think you also have a media training tip sheet available for those that are interested, right?
Yes, we will. I do. And I just want to leave those listening with this, that giving a really good interview takes a lot of practice. So here's the thing. You may do this, and you may, I want you to access this tip sheet and look through it. But if you're interested in being a resource for the media, and if you have a good contact in your local newsroom, then you definitely want to keep practicing. So Mark, as you had said earlier, we train some of our executives at the Hub on how to do media training. It's never just a one and done, this is definitely an instance where practice makes perfect. So the best way to do this, to actually practice giving an interview, is, I have to say it's on camera. And that can mean like an iPod or a mobile phone or something like that. But having friends or family or someone in your office sit you down and ask you questions on camera is the absolute best way to practice giving interviews. And here's the deal with that is you can look back at the video and you'll see some of the things that you'd love to change, because you watch news interviews all the time. You see them yourself. So you may see that you're a fidgeter, that you rock in your chair, or that you switch back and forth. And so then you'll want to work on that going forward. Or you may see an opportunity in that tape where you could have used that bridging technique. I should have said but, and then led myself back to my key messages. So the best way to do that definitely is practice. I do have that tip sheet. We'll get that out to you guys so that you can kind of follow up and work on that. And then I'm just really excited for you guys. Know again that the media needs you. They're not the bad guys. They really are trying to do the best and get the news out there. And they really do need our real estate professionals. And I know that they would love to have a good resource in their market.
That is fantastic, Cory. Thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time to do this today. We appreciate it so much. And I know we'll be hearing from you again on future podcasts.
Yeah, I look forward to it, Mark. I really appreciate the time as well. And thank you.
Thanks for listening in today. And remember, friends, by working together, we will achieve greater success faster.